A millionaire is about to feed his 6-month-old baby with a bottle who has been suffering for weeks from terrible colic and uncontrollable crying. His girlfriend seems to be the only one able to calm the child. But when she goes to the bathroom, the gardener's daughter witnesses something disturbing. The woman pouring the contents of a suspicious bottle into the baby's bottle. As the millionaire is about to offer it to his son, the girl runs desperately to him shouting, "Uncle, she put this in the baby's bottle," and shows the strange bottle. When he reads the label and discovers what it really contains, he is left in complete shock. The afternoon sun bathed the immaculate gardens of the estate when Edward Stanford held the baby bottle with slightly trembling hands. At 42, the man who ruled a corporate empire with an iron fist felt utterly out of his depth in the face of his 6-month-old son's incessant crying. The dark circles under his eyes betrayed weeks of sleepless nights, and his desperation grew with each passing day. Michael had been crying for 4 straight hours, a shrill, cutting sound that shattered Edward's heart. The terrible colic spells were getting worse, and nothing seemed to work. Only Christina, his girlfriend, could calm the baby with a patience he deeply admired. It was as if she possessed some special gift, a magic touch that turned despair into peace. "Where the hell is Christina?" he muttered to himself, looking at his son's red, contorted face. She had gone to the restroom a few minutes ago, leaving him alone with the baby and the bottle that represented his only hope of bringing the child some relief. Edward rocked Michael gently, whispering words of comfort that seemed to echo in the void. His multi-million-dollar fortune meant nothing in that moment. All his business success, all his achievements became insignificant in the face of his powerlessness to help his own son. The bottle was warm, prepared with Christina's special care. She always insisted on doing everything herself, claiming she had experience with babies and knew exactly what Michael needed. Edward trusted her completely. After months together, Christina had become not only his partner, but also his emotional anchor during the difficult transition into fatherhood. It was then that his life changed forever. "Mr. Stanford, Mr. Stanford." The desperate voice of Sophia, the 8-year-old daughter of the groundskeeper, echoed down the hall. Her bare feet slapped against the marble floor as she ran toward the living room, her eyes wide with panic. Edward turned, still holding the bottle in one hand and Michael in the other. The girl burst through the door, breathless and pale with terror. Her small hands trembled as she held something that made Edward's world crumble. "She put this in the baby's bottle," Sophia cried out, holding an empty vial out to him. I saw her do it." Edward felt his blood run cold. The vial was small, made of dark glass, and on the label was a symbol that made his stomach churn, a skull and crossbones. His hands shook so badly he almost dropped the bottle, his heart pounding. He struggled to read the label. The words seemed to dance before his eyes. Chemical stimulant, danger, keep away from children. His world began to spin. That substance had been given to his son for weeks. "Sophia, where did you find this?" Edward's voice came out as a hoarse, barely audible whisper. "She always keeps it in her purse, Mr. Stanford. I saw her putting drops in the bottle when you weren't looking. She's been doing it for a long time." The girl spoke quickly, the words tumbling over each other in her urgency to be understood. Edward looked from the bottle in his hands to the baby in his arms. Michael was still crying, but now that cry had an entirely different meaning. It wasn't natural colic. His son was being poisoned. Edward's legs gave way. He leaned against an armchair, feeling reality shatter around him. The woman he loved, the woman he trusted blindly, the woman he considered an angel sent to care for his son, was deliberately causing the child suffering. "Mr. Stanford, please, don't let her keep hurting the baby," Sophia pleaded, tears streaming down her face. "I'm scared of her." "But I couldn't let her hurt Michael." Edward pulled the girl into a one-armed hug, still holding his son with the other. His mind raced, trying to process the enormity of the betrayal. How many times had he thanked Christina for being able to calm Michael? How many times had he felt like an inadequate father, thinking only she possessed the gift of caring for his son? The sound of Christina's footsteps echoed down the hall, approaching the living room. Edward felt a wave of nausea and fury rise in his chest. How could he confront the woman he loved with such a terrible accusation? How could he accept that he had put his own son in danger by blindly trusting someone? Sophia grabbed Edward's arm, whispering urgently, "She can't know I told you, Mr. Stanford. She'll be really mad at me." Edward looked into the eyes of the brave little girl who had just saved his son's life. At that moment, he understood that his greatest lesson as a father was just beginning. Sometimes, it's the smallest voices that carry the most important warnings. Christina's footsteps drew closer, and Edward knew his life would never be the same. "Edward, darling, what's going on?" Christina's melodic voice filled the room as she entered, drying her hands on a small towel. Her eyes immediately took in the tense atmosphere, Edward's pale face, and Sophia's unusual presence. Edward's heart hammered against his ribs. For a moment, he just stared at the woman he loved, trying to reconcile her image with the devastating revelation he had just received. Christina was beautiful, with her impeccably styled brown hair and the warm smile that had won him over months ago. How was it possible that this same person was causing his son so much suffering? "Christina, we need to talk." Edward kept his voice steady, though his hands trembled slightly as he held Michael, who continued to cry. Sophia took a step back, partially hiding behind the armchair. Her eyes were fixed on Christina, and Edward saw the genuine fear on the little girl's face. "Of course, honey. But first, let me take care of Michael." Christina reached for the baby with that familiar, loving gesture. "You look exhausted. I know how hard it is to see him like this." Edward hesitated. Part of him still wanted to believe it was all a misunderstanding, that Christina would have an explanation that would make everything right again. But the other part, the part that was learning to be a father, screamed at him not to hand over his son. "Actually, I'd like to talk to you first." Edward held Michael close, watching Christina's reaction carefully. "Sophia found something in the garden that worried me." Christina's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, so quickly that Edward almost missed it. She looked at Sophia with an expression that seemed cordial, but there was something cold in her eyes. "Oh, our little Sophia." Christina crouched down to the girl's level, speaking in the sweet tone she used with children. "What did you find, sweetie?" Sophia shrank back, clutching the armchair. Edward noticed how the girl avoided Christina's gaze, as if in the presence of something that deeply frightened her. "She found this." Edward held up the empty vial, carefully watching every micro-expression on Christina's face. "A bottle with a danger symbol on it. Sophia said you put the contents in Michael's bottle." Christina slowly stood up, and Edward saw something flash in her eyes before she composed her features into a look of shock and concern. "My God, Edward, are you serious?" She placed a hand on her chest, as if appalled. "That's a terrible accusation. Where would an 8-year-old child even find something like that?" "She said she saw you using it," Edward said, his voice firm, though his heart was breaking. "Several times." Christina looked at Sophia with an expression that tried to be gentle, but Edward caught a flicker of irritation. "Sophia, sweetie, are you sure about what you saw? Sometimes our imaginations play tricks on us, don't they?" Christina spoke slowly, as if explaining something simple to a child. "Maybe you saw me giving Michael his vitamins, or some medicine his daddy asked me to give him." Sophia shook her head vigorously. "No, I saw you put the liquid from that bottle in his formula. You always look around before you do it." A chill ran down Edward's spine. The girl's description was too specific, too detailed to be a product of imagination. "Edward, do you really believe I would be capable of hurting Michael?" Christina moved closer to him, her eyes filling with tears. "I love that baby as if he were my own son. I've dedicated my life to taking care of him." Christina's performance was perfect. her voice laced with emotion and indignation. Edward felt his resolve waver. After all, this was the woman who spent sleepless nights caring for Michael, who knew every detail of the baby's needs, who had become indispensable in their lives. "I don't know what to think, Christina." Edward ran a free hand through his hair, feeling torn between the girl's accusation and the love he felt for his girlfriend. "But this vial is real, and Sophia seems terrified." "Of course she's scared. You're interrogating her about something she clearly doesn't understand." Christina's tone grew slightly firmer. "Edward, think about it. Why would I do something like that? What would I possibly gain by making Michael suffer?" It was a logical question, and for a moment, Edward had no answer. Christina was right. What motive could she have for harming the baby? "Maybe," Christina continued, her voice softening again. "Maybe Sophia found something old in the garden. You know how kids are. They make up stories for attention." Edward looked at Sophia, who was watching him with wide, frightened eyes. The girl didn't look like she was making anything up. There was a desperate sincerity in her gaze that made Edward's heart ache. "Mr. Stanford." "I'm not lying," Sophia whispered, her voice barely audible. "I saw her do it. I'm scared of her." The girl's words hit Edward like a punch. Scared. Sophia was scared of Christina. That explained why she always acted differently whenever Christina was around. "Edward, you need to think about what you're doing," Christina said, placing a hand on his arm, her voice filled with concern. "You're letting a child plant seeds of doubt in our relationship. That's not healthy for any of us." Edward closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of the situation. A part of him wanted to believe Christina, wanted everything to go back to normal. But the other part, the father he was becoming, couldn't ignore the fear in Sophia's eyes. "And I need some time to think," Edward finally said, his voice weaker than he intended. Christina nodded, but Edward saw a flash of something in her eyes he couldn't identify. Satisfaction, relief, or something more sinister. "Of course, honey. But please, don't let this destroy what we've built together." Christina kissed his forehead gently. "I'll be here when you need me." As Christina left the room, Edward found himself alone with Sophia and Michael. The girl approached him, whispering urgently, "Mr. Stanford, she's lying. I know she's lying." Edward looked at the vial in his hand and then at his son in his arms. The seed of doubt had been planted, and he knew there would be no peace until he found the truth. The early morning hours found Edward awake in his study, watching Michael finally sleep in his arms. For the first time in weeks, the baby hadn't had the bottle prepared by Christina. Edward had insisted on making it himself, using only formula and filtered water. The result was astonishing. Michael had slept for 3 straight hours, without the spasms and crying fits that had become their routine. The coincidence was too disturbing to ignore. Edward stared at the empty vial on his desk, illuminated by the soft lamplight. All night, he had been researching the chemical stimulant on the label. What he discovered made his blood run cold. The substance was used in laboratories to induce stress and agitation in test animals. In small, steady doses, it would cause the exact symptoms Michael had been exhibiting: intense colic, extreme irritability, and uncontrollable crying. The soft sound of Christina's footsteps echoed in the hallway. Edward quickly hid the vial in a drawer and pretended to be asleep in the armchair. She appeared at the doorway in a blue silk robe, a look of maternal concern on her face. "Darling, you should be in bed." Christina approached silently, looking at Michael. "Let me take him to his crib." "No need," Edward mumbled, keeping his eyes half closed. "He's sleeping fine right here." "You're going to kill your back," Christina insisted, reaching for him. "I can fix him a warm bottle. It'll help him sleep better." A shiver went down Edward's spine. Even in the middle of the night, Christina was offering to prepare the bottle. How many times had she done this? How many times had he thanked her, thinking she was an angel sent to care for his son? "Thanks, but he seems content." Edward opened his eyes slightly, watching her reaction. In fact, this is the first time he slept so peacefully in weeks. Christina hesitated for a moment, and Edward caught a strange look on her face. Concern, annoyance. She quickly composed herself, smiling tenderly. "That's wonderful, honey. Maybe his colic is finally getting better." Christina kissed his forehead. "I'll make you some tea. You look tense." When Christina left, Edward stood up carefully and walked to the window. The garden was shrouded in darkness, but he could see the small cottage where Maria, the groundskeeper, lived with her daughter Sophia. A faint light was still on in the window, suggesting someone else was awake too. The conversation from the afternoon kept replaying in his mind. The way Sophia had recoiled from Christina, the genuine fear in her eyes, the specificity of her accusations. Edward had always thought of Sophia as an imaginative girl, but never a liar. She had always been direct and honest, sometimes too much so for her age. Michael stirred in his arms, letting out a small, contented sigh. Edward looked at his son's serene face, so different from the pained expression that had become the norm. Was it possible that the absence of the substance was already making a difference? "Here's your tea, darling." Christina returned with a steaming mug, a scent of chamomile wafting from it. "It'll help you relax." Edward accepted the tea but didn't drink it. His suspicion now extended to everything Christina offered him. Was it paranoia or paternal instinct? "Christina, can I ask you a question?" Edward watched her carefully as he spoke. "Of course, honey. Anything? Do you have any experience with babies? Before Michael, I mean..." Christina smiled, but Edward noticed an almost imperceptible tension in her shoulders. "I've told you I did some nannying when I was younger. Why do you ask?" "It's just that you always know exactly what to do when Michael gets fussy. It's like you have a special gift." "I guess it's just maternal instinct," Christina said, sitting on the arm of the chair and running a hand through Edward's hair. "Some women are just born with it." Edward nodded, but something about her answer bothered him. She always avoided giving details about her past, changing the subject or offering vague replies. He'd never paid much attention before, but now every word seemed loaded. "Where did you learn about baby care?" Edward pressed gently. "Edward, why all the questions?" Christina laughed, but it sounded forced. "You're making me feel like I'm being interrogated." "Sorry, it's just that after the talk with Sophia, I'm trying to make sense of things." The mention of Sophia's name completely changed the atmosphere. Edward saw Christina's muscles tense, though she kept the smile on her face. "That girl is causing unnecessary trouble," Christina said slowly, choosing her words carefully. "Kids that age sometimes make up stories to get attention. It's quite common. Do you think Sophia is lying? Not necessarily lying, but maybe confusing things. She might have seen something she didn't understand and created a story around it in her mind." Edward watched Christina's face as she spoke. There was something calculated in her words, as if she were carefully constructing a narrative. The spontaneous, warm woman he had known seemed to be reciting a script. "Christina, are you afraid of something?" Edward asked unexpectedly, watching her reaction. "Afraid? What would I have to be afraid of?" Christina laughed again, but Edward noticed she avoided his gaze. "I don't know. You've seemed on edge since yesterday." "Of course I'm on edge. My boyfriend is accusing me of poisoning his son based on what an 8-year-old said." Christina stood up abruptly, her voice rising slightly. Edward was taken aback by the reaction. It was the first time he'd ever seen Christina lose her composure, and it made him even more suspicious. "I'm not accusing you of anything," Edward said calmly. "I'm just trying to understand what happened." "What happened is that a child found something in the garden and decided to invent a dramatic story. And you're choosing to believe her instead of trusting the woman you love." Christina's words were logical, but her aggressive tone was a world away from what Edward was used to. He began to wonder how many sides of Christina he had yet to see. "Maybe you're right," Edward conceded, but his words sounded hollow even to him. Christina calmed down immediately, as if realizing her mask had slipped for a moment. "I'm sorry, honey. I'm just upset by this whole situation." She moved closer again, her voice returning to its usual melodic tone. "And you know I would do anything to protect Michael." Edward nodded, but a terrible question began to form in his mind. What if Christina was telling the truth about protecting Michael, but lying about who was causing the danger? As she left the study, Edward looked at the untouched tea in his hands and then at his son sleeping peacefully in his arms. For the first time in months, he wondered if he really knew the woman he loved at all. The new day brought a decision Edward could no longer postpone. He needed to talk to Maria, the groundskeeper, to better understand what Sophia had witnessed. Maria had worked at the estate for over a decade, long before Christina had entered their lives. If anyone could give him an honest perspective, it was her. Edward found Maria tending the rose bushes in the front garden, her precise movements demonstrating decades of experience. At 55, she possessed a quiet wisdom that had always put him at ease. Her constant presence on the property made her almost part of the family. "Good morning, Maria," Edward approached, holding Michael in his arms. The baby was calm, curiously watching the butterflies that danced among the flowers. "Good morning, Mr. Stanford," Maria said, straightening up and removing her gardening gloves. "How's our little man today?" "Better, actually. He slept through the night." Edward hesitated, searching for the right words. "Maria, I need to talk to you about what happened yesterday with Sophia." Maria's face clouded over slightly. She glanced around, making sure they were alone, before answering. "Mr. Stanford, Sophia's been very scared since yesterday. She barely slept a wink." "Scared of what, Maria?" Maria sighed deeply, as if she'd been carrying a heavy weight for a long time. "Sir, can I be frank with you? Please, I need the truth. Sophia has been telling me things for weeks, things about Miss Christina that have worried me." Maria spoke in a low voice, her eyes constantly checking to make sure they weren't being overheard. Edward's heart sped up. "What kind of things?" "The girl has always been observant, you know. She plays in the garden and sees a lot. Sophia told me several times that Miss Christina acts strangely when you're not around." "Strange how?" Maria hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the conversation but determined to protect the child she'd raised. Sophia said, "Miss Christina always checks to see if she's alone before preparing the bottles. She looks all around, like she's doing something wrong." Edward swallowed hard. The description was identical to what Sophia had told him the day before. "But is there anything else, Maria?" "Mr. Stanford, I didn't want to meddle, but—" Maria looked down at Michael with affection. "Sophia told me she's seen Miss Christina with other small vials. She always hides them quickly if someone comes near." "Other vials?" "Yes, sir. Sophia said she has a small, separate purse where she keeps those things. A purse she never puts down." Edward recalled that Christina did indeed always carry a small leather clutch, which she said held personal feminine things. He had never questioned its contents. "Maria, did Sophia say you didn't believe her?" Maria looked surprised by the question. "On the contrary, Mr. Stanford, I believe Sophia completely. The girl has never lied to me in her entire life. That's why I've been so worried." "Then why didn't you come to me sooner?" Maria lowered her eyes, clearly embarrassed. "Sir, how could a simple groundskeeper accuse the boss's girlfriend of something so terrible? Who would have believed me?" Edward felt a pang of guilt. Maria was right. Her social position put her in an impossible situation. Even if she wanted to protect Michael, she had no power to confront Christina directly. "Do you believe Christina is deliberately harming Michael?" "Mr. Stanford, I've watched this baby grow since he was born. For the first few months, he was a happy, calm child. The problem started about 2 months ago, shortly after Miss Christina moved in." The timeline fit perfectly. Edward remembered that Christina had moved into the mansion exactly when Michael had started having health problems. "Maria, where is Sophia now?" "She's at the house, sir. She didn't want to come to work with me today." She's afraid of running into Miss Christina. Edward looked toward the small cottage where Maria lived with her daughter. It was a simple home, but filled with love and honesty, a stark contrast to the emotional turmoil his own house had become. "Can I talk to her?" "Of course, Mr. Stanford. But please be gentle. The girl is very shaken." They walked together to the small house. Sophia was sitting on the porch, nervously playing with a doll. When she saw Edward approaching, her eyes filled with tears. "Mr. Stanford, do you believe me?" The girl's question came out as a desperate whisper. Edward crouched down to her level, still holding Michael. "Sophia, I need you to tell me everything you saw, every single detail. I saw her lots of times, Mr. Stanford. Always when you leave for work, she takes those little bottles from her purse and puts drops in the formula. Then she shakes it up really good to mix it. How many times did you see this happen?" Sophia frowned, concentrating. "Lots of times, almost every day when you're not home." Edward felt nauseous. If Sophia was telling the truth, Michael had been systematically poisoned for months. "Sophia, did you ever try to tell anyone else before?" "I told Mom, but she said it was better not to meddle in grown-up business." Sophia looked at Maria with an expression of understanding beyond her years. Mom was afraid of losing her job." Maria placed a hand on her daughter's shoulder, her eyes welling with tears. "Forgive me, Mr. Stanford. I should have been braver." "Maria, you have nothing to apologize for. I understand your position." Edward turned back to Sophia. "Sophia, are you absolutely sure about what you saw?" "Yes, Mr. Stanford, and there's one more thing." Sophia hesitated, as if revealing a great secret. "I took one of the bottles she threw in the trash. It's hidden in my room." Edward and Maria exchanged shocked glances. "Can you show it to me?" Sophia nodded and ran inside the house. She returned quickly with a small vial identical to the one he had found the day before. This one still contained a few drops of a clear liquid. "Mr. Stanford, I know I shouldn't go through the trash, but something told me it was important to keep it." Edward held the vial with trembling hands. It was the physical proof he needed. Now there was no more room for doubt about the truth of Sophia's accusations. "Sophia, you are a very brave girl." Edward hugged the child with his free arm. "You may have just saved Michael's life. So you believe me?" "I believe you completely." Edward looked at Maria and then at Sophia. "And now I'm going to protect both of you, just like you protected my son." As he walked back to the mansion, Edward knew his life had changed forever. It was no longer a matter of doubt or suspicion. It was a terrible truth he had to face, even if it meant destroying the love he thought he had for Christina. The war for his son's future was just beginning. Edward returned to the mansion with the second vial hidden in his pocket and an iron resolve growing in his chest. He needed more evidence before confronting Christina again, but he also couldn't allow her to continue poisoning Michael. The situation required strategy and extreme caution. He found Christina in the kitchen, preparing what looked like a morning bottle for Michael. She was humming softly, as she always did, but now the melody sounded sinister to Edward's ears. "Good morning, darling." Christina turned with a radiant smile. "How was your morning walk with Michael?" "Enlightening," Edward replied, watching her every move. "Michael seems to be feeling better." "That's wonderful. Maybe his colic is finally letting up." Christina finished preparing the bottle, testing the temperature on her wrist. "Here's his breakfast." Edward stared at the bottle as if it were a loaded weapon. "Actually, I'd like to try something different today. I heard that sometimes changing the brand of formula can help with digestive issues." Christina's expression faltered almost imperceptibly. "But Edward, Michael is already used to this formula. A sudden change could make his symptoms worse. It's just for one day. A test run." Edward kept his tone casual, but internally he was on high alert for Christina's every reaction. "Honey, I really don't think that's a good idea. I have experience with babies." "Remember," Christina insisted, holding the bottle firmly, "trust me." The words, "trust me," echoed in Edward's mind with a whole new weight. For months, he had trusted her blindly. Now, every plea for trust sounded like manipulation. "Christina, can I ask you a personal question?" "Of course, darling." She moved closer, but Edward noticed she still clutched the prepared bottle. "Where exactly did you learn about baby care? You've never given me any specific details." Christina hesitated, and Edward saw something flash in her eyes. Calculation. She was deciding which story to tell. "I worked as a nanny during college. I took care of several young children." The answer came too quickly, too rehearsed. "Which college?" "Edward. Why so many questions about my past? That shouldn't matter to us. Just curious. After all, we're getting married soon. Aren't we?" The mention of marriage completely changed Christina's expression. Her eyes lit up with an intensity Edward had never noticed before. "Of course we're getting married. I can't wait to officially be a part of this family." Christina moved closer, placing her free hand on his chest. "Edward, you know that I love you and Michael more than anything in the world, don't you?" "I know," Edward lied, watching how she had expertly dodged the question about her education. "Then trust me about the bottle. I know what's best for Michael." Edward realized he was witnessing a pattern. Whenever questioned about something specific, Christina redirected the conversation to her feelings or to emotional issues. It was a subtle but effective manipulation technique. "All right, but first, let me give Michael a vitamin. The pediatrician recommended it." Edward improvised, trying to buy time. "What vitamin? You didn't tell me about that." "It's something new he suggested yesterday. It's in my study." Edward headed to the study, carrying Michael, and Christina followed. He could feel the tension radiating from her, though she maintained a facade of tranquility. In the study, Edward pretended to search for a non-existent vitamin while watching Christina from the corner of his eye. She was restless, her eyes constantly darting back to the bottle in her hands. "Edward, why don't you let me hold Michael while you look? He's getting fussy." Michael was indeed starting to fuss, but Edward noticed the baby wasn't looking at Christina the way he used to. It was as if, instinctively, the child was also developing an aversion to her presence. "Found it." Edward held up a vial of infant vitamins he had bought weeks ago but never used. "I just need to mix a few drops into the bottle." "No!" Christina's exclamation was sharper than she intended. "I mean, it's not recommended to mix vitamins directly into the formula. It can change the taste, and Michael might reject it." Edward stopped, staring at her. The reaction had been far too intense for a simple suggestion. "You're right. I'll give him the vitamins separately." Edward opened the vitamin dropper and placed a few drops directly into Michael's mouth, which he accepted without issue. "Now he can have his bottle." Christina held the bottle out to Edward, but he hesitated. "Actually, I'll make a new one. This one got cold while we were talking." "Edward, stop this!" Christina finally lost her patience. "You're being paranoid and obsessive. Michael needs to eat now." The mask had slipped again. Edward saw genuine anger in Christina's eyes, something she rarely showed. "Paranoid about what, Christina?" "About everything. About me, about the bottle, about Sophia." Christina stopped abruptly, realizing she had mentioned Sophia without Edward bringing up the subject. "Why did you mention Sophia?" Christina quickly composed herself, but the damage was done. "Because it's obvious that girls' words are getting to you, Edward. You need to stop letting a child plant doubts in our relationship." "And what if Sophia is telling the truth?" "She's not," Christina answered too quickly, with too much certainty. "Edward, that child is causing problems for our family. Maybe it's time you considered letting Maria go and finding another groundskeeper." A cold dread washed over Edward. Christina was trying to remove the only witnesses to her actions. Fire Maria? Why? She's clearly not raising her daughter properly. Sophia is making up malicious stories, and Maria is doing nothing to correct her. Or maybe Sophia is being a brave kid trying to protect my son. The words were out before Edward could stop them. Christina froze for a moment, processing the implication of what he had said. "Edward, do you really believe I would hurt Michael?" Her voice was filled with a sadness that seemed genuine, but Edward now questioned every emotion she displayed. "I don't know what to believe anymore." "Christina, then let me prove it to you." Christina raised the bottle. "I'll take a drink from it right in front of you. That will show you there's nothing wrong with it." Edward watched, fascinated and horrified, as Christina brought the bottle to her lips. It was the perfect bluff. She knew he wouldn't let her drink something potentially toxic, even while suspecting her. "No." Edward gently took her wrist. "You don't have to do that." Christina smiled, and Edward saw triumph in her eyes. She had won that round of their psychological game. "So, you trust me?" Edward looked at the woman he loved, or thought he loved, and realized he was staring at a stranger. How many other sides of Christina had he yet to see? How many other lies had she told? "I want to trust you," Edward answered honestly. "Then trust me." Christina held out the bottle again. "Let me take care of our son." The word "our" hit Edward like a slap. Michael was not Christina's son, but she spoke as if he were. Was it possessiveness or something more sinister? As he watched Christina wait for his decision, Edward realized he was in the middle of a silent battle for the soul of his family. And he still didn't know if he was strong enough to win. Edward spent the afternoon in his study, pretending to work while secretly watching Christina's every move on the mansion's security cameras. He had activated the monitoring system for the first time in years, claiming security concerns after a supposed string of break-ins in the neighborhood. Christina had accepted the explanation without question, but Edward noticed how she discreetly checked the camera's locations. Michael slept peacefully in the crib beside Edward's desk. For the third time in a row, the baby had rejected the bottle prepared by Christina, crying intensely whenever she approached with the liquid. Edward had to intervene, preparing a new bottle with only the original formula E, which Michael accepted immediately. The baby's behavior was too revealing to be a coincidence. At 3 in the afternoon, Edward watched on the monitor as Christina headed into the garden, carrying a small purse he had never noticed before. She looked around carefully before walking toward the external garbage cans, the ones hidden from the view of the main house's windows. Edward's heart raced. He quickly picked up Michael and crept silently down the stairs, positioning himself at an angle where he could watch Christina without being seen. What he saw confirmed his worst fears. Christina pulled several small vials from the purse, all identical to the ones Sophia had found. One by one, she emptied them into the trash can and then tossed the empty containers on top. Her movements were quick and precise, like someone accustomed to this routine. Edward watched in horror as she counted the vials before discarding them. 8, 10. It was impossible to know how many times his son had been poisoned, but the number of containers suggested a systematic, prolonged operation. When Christina returned to the house, Edward was already back in his study, pretending to be focused on financial reports. She appeared at the door with a radiant smile, as if nothing had happened. "How's our little prince?" Christina approached the crib, but Michael immediately started to whimper as she reached for him. "He's a little fussy today," Edward lied, knowing Michael had been perfectly calm until Christina's arrival. "Poor thing. Maybe he's hungry again. Shall I make him a bottle?" "Thanks, but he just ate. He's fine." Edward saw a shadow of irritation cross Christina's face before she composed herself. "Edward, are you sure you're feeding Michael properly? He seems to be rejecting the meals I prepare." It was a clever reversal. Christina was planting doubts about Edward's competence as a father, making him question his own observations. "I'm sure. In fact, he's been eating better these last few days." Christina frowned, as if genuinely concerned. "Maybe we should check with the pediatrician. Sudden changes in appetite can be a sign of health problems." Edward watched as she skillfully built an alternate narrative, one where he was the incompetent father and she was the dedicated caregiver trying to protect the child from his neglect. "Christina, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Honey, why do you always insist on preparing the bottles yourself? I could help more." Christina hesitated for a fraction of a second before answering. "It's just that I've developed a specific routine that works well for Michael. Every baby has their preferences, and I've learned exactly how he likes it." "What kind of routine?" "Well, the temperature has to be just right. The mix has to be done a certain way." Christina gestured vaguely, avoiding specifics. "Could you teach me?" "Edward, why so many questions about something so simple?" Christina laughed, but Edward detected tension in her voice. "Don't you trust me anymore?" Again, she redirected the conversation to emotional issues, avoiding a direct answer. "Of course I trust you. I'd just like to be more involved in Michael's care. You already do so much, darling. Let me handle the practical things while you focus on work and providing for our family." Edward noted how Christina emphasized the word "our," as if she were already an official part of the family. It was both presumptuous and possessive. Edward's phone rang, interrupting the tense conversation. It was Dr. Evans, Michael's pediatrician. "Edward, I have the results from the tests I ordered at your last visit." The doctor's voice was grave. "I need to speak with you in person. There are some irregularities that have caught my attention." Edward's blood ran cold. "What kind of irregularities?" "I'd rather not discuss it over the phone. Can you come to the office this afternoon?" "Of course. I'll be there in an hour." When Edward hung up, Christina was watching him with an unreadable expression. "Trouble?" she asked, her tone attempting to sound casual. "Doctor, Evans wants to discuss some test results." "What tests? I didn't know Michael had any tests done." Edward realized his mistake. He had taken Michael for additional tests without telling Christina, and now she was suspicious. They were just routine tests to look into his colic. "Edward, why didn't you tell me? I always go with Michael to all his doctor's appointments." It was true. Christina always insisted on accompanying Michael to the pediatrician, and Edward had always appreciated her dedication. Now he wondered if she had other reasons for wanting to be present. It was a last-minute decision. "I didn't want to bother you." Christina moved closer, placing a hand on his arm. "Edward, we are a family. Decisions about Michael's health should be made together." Again, the presumption that they were already an official family. Edward began to wonder how long Christina had been planning to permanently install herself in their lives. "You're right. Next time, I'll include you. Can I go with you today?" "It's not necessary. It's just a quick meeting." Edward saw a flash of something in Christina's eyes. Anger, frustration. She did not like being excluded from Michael's medical affairs. "All right, but I want you to tell me everything when you get back." "Of course." As Edward prepared to leave, Christina remained in the study, apparently organizing some papers. But in the reflection of the window, Edward saw that she was intently studying the documents on his desk, as if searching for something specific. "Christina, are you looking for something?" She straightened up quickly, an expression of innocent surprise on her face. "No, darling. Just tidying up a bit." Edward discreetly gathered all the important papers and locked them in his desk drawer. Trust was a luxury he could no longer afford. Driving to the pediatrician's office, Edward reflected on how his life had become a minefield. Every word, every action, every decision had to be carefully calculated. He was living with the enemy, and the enemy had total access to his child. The appointment with Dr. Evans might finally give him the answers he needed, or it could reveal even more terrifying truths about what was happening to Michael. One thing was certain: the silent war for his son's future was about to escalate dramatically. Dr. Evans's office had never seemed so intimidating. Edward sat in the chair across from the pediatrician's desk, holding Michael in his lap, while the doctor carefully reviewed the test results. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the soft sound of the baby's calm breathing. "Edward, I need to be direct with you." Dr. Evans finally looked up from the papers, his expression grave. "We found traces of an unidentified substance in Michael's blood." Edward felt the world stop. What kind of substance? "It's a chemical compound that should not be present in a child's system. It appears to be some kind of synthetic stimulant." The doctor spoke calmly, but Edward could see the deep concern in his eyes. "Edward, do you have any idea how Michael could have been exposed to this?" Edward swallowed hard, his most terrible suspicions confirmed. "Doctor, could this substance cause intense colic and irritability?" "Absolutely. In an infant, it would cause the exact symptoms Michael has been presenting. But Edward, this is very serious. We are talking about poisoning." The doctor's words hammered in Edward's mind. Poisoning. His son was being deliberately poisoned, and he had allowed it to happen for months. "Doctor, I need to show you something." Edward pulled the 2 vials Sophia had found from his pocket. A child found these. She said she saw someone putting the contents in Michael's bottle. Dr. Evans examined the vials with growing alarm. "Edward, where did you get these?" "Our groundskeeper's daughter found them. She's 8 years old and said she saw my girlfriend using these in Michael's bottles." The doctor was silent for a long moment, processing the information. "Edward, are you telling me you suspect your girlfriend is deliberately poisoning your son?" "I didn't want to believe it, but all the evidence points to it." Dr. Evans stood up and walked to the window, clearly disturbed. "Edward, this is extremely serious. If your suspicions are correct, Michael is in immediate danger." "I know, but I need more evidence before I take any action." "No," the doctor turned abruptly. "Edward, you don't understand the gravity of the situation. This substance, if administered continuously, could cause permanent damage to Michael's neurological development." Edward felt like he'd been punched in the gut. Permanent damage. A baby's brain is in a crucial stage of development. Prolonged exposure to chemical stimulants can affect cognitive ability, reflexes, even his future personality. Edward looked down at Michael, who gazed up at him with big, trusting eyes. The possibility that his son could suffer permanent consequences because of his own naivety was unbearable. "What should I do?" "First, you must ensure Michael is not exposed to this substance again. Second, we need to run more detailed tests to assess any damage already done. And third," Dr. Evans hesitated. "Third, Edward, if your suspicions are correct, you need to involve the authorities. This is attempted murder." The doctor's words made Edward tremble. Attempted murder. Christina wasn't just making Michael uncomfortable. She was slowly trying to kill him. "Doctor, could you analyze these vials? Confirm if the contents are the same substance found in Michael's blood?" "Of course. I'll send them for lab analysis immediately. We'll have the results in 24 hours. Edward nodded, feeling a mix of relief and terror. He would finally have irrefutable scientific evidence, but he would also have to face the reality that the woman he loved was trying to murder his child. "Edward, there's one more thing." Dr. Evans returned to his chair, his expression even more serious. "I did some research after seeing the initial test results. The substance in Michael's blood is extremely specific. It's not something someone could easily get their hands on." "What do you mean?" "This substance is primarily used in pharmaceutical labs for animal testing. Whoever is doing this has access to highly controlled materials." A chill ran down Edward's spine. Christina mentioned she worked with natural therapies, but she was never specific. "Edward, you need to investigate her past. This is not the work of an amateur." The doctor handed Edward a business card. "This is the contact for a private investigator who specializes in sensitive cases involving children. I strongly recommend you call him immediately." Edward pocketed the card, feeling the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. "Doctor, how much time does Michael have if we don't stop this?" Dr. Evans sighed deeply. "Edward, the good news is the levels in his blood aren't fatal yet. But if the exposure continues..." He left the sentence hanging in the air. I understand. There's one more thing you need to know. The doctor hesitated again. Based on the levels in Michael's blood and considering his weight and age, I estimate he has been exposed to this substance for at least 2 months, possibly 3. Edward closed his eyes, doing the math. 3 months. Exactly when Christina had moved into the mansion and taken over Michael's primary care. Edward, you cannot hesitate any longer. Every day that passes, the risks increase exponentially. I know, I'll act today. And Edward, Dr. Evans leaned forward, do not confront this woman alone. If she is capable of deliberately poisoning an infant, there is no telling what else she's capable of. Edward nodded, hugging Michael tighter. His son had survived months of systematic poisoning, but now they faced the most dangerous period. Christina would eventually find out that he knew the truth. And desperate people take desperate measures. Driving home, Edward made a decision that would change everything. He would not wait for more evidence. He would not give Christina another opportunity to hurt Michael. That night, when she tried to give the baby another poisoned bottle, he would confront her with everything he knew. The cat-and-mouse game was over. This was now open war. And Edward would do anything to protect his son, even if it meant destroying the woman he had loved. When he arrived at the mansion, Edward saw Christina in the living room window, watching his return with an unreadable expression. She waved cheerfully, but Edward detected something forced in her smile. She knew. Somehow, Christina suspected he was discovering the truth. The final battle was about to begin. Edward entered the mansion carrying Michael and a steely determination he hadn't felt in months. Christina was waiting for him in the living room, her smile looking more strained than ever. There was something different in her eyes, a watchfulness Edward had never noticed before. How was the appointment, darling? Christina moved closer, reaching for Michael, but the baby shrank against his father's chest. Enlightening, Edward held Michael firmly in his arms. Doctor, Evans found some interesting things in the tests. Edward watched Christina's reaction carefully. For a split second, he saw panic in her eyes before she composed her expression. I hope it's nothing serious. Actually, it's quite serious, Edward said, heading for his study. Christina followed him. They found chemical substances in Michael's blood. Christina stopped short. What kind of substances? Synthetic stimulants. The kind used in pharmaceutical labs. The silence that followed was deafening. Edward could almost hear Christina's mind working furiously, calculating her next move. My God, Edward, how is that possible? Christina clutched her chest in a convincing performance of shock. Could someone have given Michael something without us knowing? Edward had to admit she was a talented actress. If he didn't know the truth, he would have completely believed her surprise. And it's a possibility. Dr. Evans said only someone with access to pharmaceutical materials could get these substances. Edward saw Christina swallow hard. She was beginning to realize he knew more than he was letting on. Edward, do you suspect anyone in particular? I'm looking into all possibilities. Edward sat behind his desk, creating a physical barrier between them. Christina, have you ever worked in a pharmaceutical lab? The question landed like a direct hit. Christina turned pale, but she quickly tried to recover. Why would you ask that? Just trying to understand how Michael could have been exposed to these substances. Edward, are you investigating me? Christina's voice trembled slightly. Do you really think I would hurt Michael? I have to protect my son. That means questioning everything and everyone. Christina approached the desk, her hands shaking slightly. Edward, I love you and Michael more than anything. How can you even suspect me? Then answer the question. Have you ever worked in a lab? Christina hesitated for far too long. I worked briefly for a pharmaceutical company years ago, but it was just an administrative job. Edward knew she was lying. The answer had been rehearsed, but not convincingly. Which company? Edward, that was a long time ago. Why does it matter now? Because my son is being poisoned, and I need to know by whom." The words came out with a harshness that surprised them both. Christina recoiled as if she'd been slapped. "You really think I would poison Michael?" Tears began to stream down Christina's face. "After everything we've been through together, after all the care I've given him." Edward watched the tears, wondering if they were genuine or just another part of her performance. "Christina, where is your small clutch? The leather one you always carry?" The seemingly innocent question made Christina freeze completely. "What clutch?" "The small one. You always take it with you when you go into the garden." "I don't know what you're talking about." Edward stood up, still holding Michael. "Christina, I saw you throwing vials in the trash today." The world seemed to stop. Christina was paralyzed, her eyes widening with pure terror. The mask had finally, completely fallen away. "Edward, I can explain." "Then explain." Christina looked around desperately, like a cornered animal searching for an escape. "You don't understand. I was trying to help Michael. Help him by poisoning him. It wasn't poison. It was to calm him down." Christina was speaking rapidly now, her words tumbling over each other. "He cried so much, and you were so stressed. I just wanted our family to be happy." Edward felt a wave of nausea. "Our family? Christina, you were torturing my son." "I never wanted to hurt him. It was just to keep him calm, so I could take better care of him." "Liar," Edward said, his voice low but firm, making Christina flinch. "Doctor, Evans told me this substance could cause permanent brain damage." Christina grew even paler. "I didn't know. I thought it was harmless." "You knew exactly what you were doing. You have a background in pharmaceuticals." "Edward, please, let me explain everything. We can fix this together." "There's nothing to fix. You poisoned my son for months." Christina threw herself to her knees before Edward, grabbing his legs. "Please, don't leave me. I love you." "Everything I did was for love." Edward looked down at the woman at his feet, the one he had loved and trusted, and felt only revulsion. "This isn't love, Christina. This is a sickness. Edward, if you report me, you'll destroy our family. Think of the scandal. Think of how this will affect Michael in the future." Even in her desperation, Christina was trying to manipulate him. Edward realized she had likely used these same tactics in other relationships. "Our family?" Edward stepped away from her. "Christina, you were never part of my family. You're a predator who infiltrated our lives." "Don't say that. I dedicated my life to taking care of you." "You dedicated your life to slowly destroying us." Edward turned for the door, but Christina followed him, frantic. "Edward, where are you going?" "To call the police." "No!" Christina screamed, completely losing control. "You can't do that." "I am not going to prison. You should have thought of that before you poisoned a baby." Edward walked out of the study, leaving Christina sobbing on the floor. He knew there were more secrets to be revealed, more terrible truths about the woman who had invaded their lives. But for now, Michael was safe, and that was all that mattered. As he dialed 911, Edward heard Christina speaking urgently on the phone in another room. She was calling someone, asking for help or giving a warning. Edward realized Christina wasn't acting alone. There were other people involved in her sinister plan. The revelation of a larger conspiracy made Edward understand that the battle was far from over. Christina was just one piece in a game, far more complex and dangerous than he had ever imagined. Michael looked up at his father with his big, trusting eyes, unaware that he had just been saved from a terrible fate. Edward kissed his son's forehead, silently promising that he would never again allow anyone to harm the child who was his reason for living. The war for Michael's safety had evolved into something much larger and more perilous than Edward could have foreseen. While waiting for the police to arrive, Edward called the private investigator Dr. Evans had recommended. Robert Shaw answered on the first ring as if he'd been expecting the call. His voice was calm and professional, but Edward detected an urgency that worried him even more. "Mr. Stanford, Dr. Evans filled me in on your situation. I can be there in 30 minutes. The police are already on their way. Even better, I need to speak with you before they arrive. There are things I've discovered about the woman you know as Christina Dubois that will shock you. Edward's blood ran cold. You've already investigated her? Yes. When Dr. Evans described the case, her name set off alarm bells. Mr. Stanford, you're dealing with something much bigger than you think. Edward looked at Michael, who was sleeping peacefully in his arms, oblivious to the danger surrounding them. What did you find? The woman you know as Christina Dubois isn't her real name. It's Carmen Vance, and this isn't the first baby she's poisoned. The words hit Edward like a physical blow. He sank into an armchair, his legs feeling weak. Not the first? Mr. Stanford, I'll be there in 20 minutes. Do not leave that woman alone, and do not accept anything she offers you. Not water, not coffee, nothing. The call ended, leaving Edward in a state of shock. Other babies. Christina had done this before. How many families had she destroyed? How many children had suffered at her hands? He heard footsteps approaching and quickly pocketed his phone. Christina appeared at the doorway, her face swollen from crying, but there was something different in her eyes, a cold determination that frightened him. Edward, we need to talk before it's too late. We have nothing left to talk about, Christina. You don't understand what you're doing. Christina walked into the room, closing the door behind her. If you turn me over to the police, you'll destroy more than you can imagine. What do you mean? There are powerful people involved in this. Edward, people who will not be happy if I'm arrested. A chill ran down his spine. What people? People who can make your life a living hell? Who can make you lose everything, your company, your fortune, even custody of Michael? The threats were subtle but clear. Christina was no longer pleading. She was negotiating. Are you threatening me? I'm trying to protect you. Edward, you think you know the world you live in, but there are things men like you never see. There's a network of people who do things for money. What kind of things? Christina moved closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. Things like ensuring the babies of wealthy men get just sick enough for special women to become indispensable. Edward felt nauseous. You're saying there are other women doing this. I'm saying you're not the first rich, lonely man who needed help with a difficult baby. The coldness with which Christina spoke was terrifying. She was describing a criminal operation as if it were a regular business. Edward, if you let me walk away right now, I promise you'll never hear from me again. Michael will recover, you'll be happy, and you'll never have to know about the other families. Other families. Families just like yours. Wealthy men with young children. Men who need help and are quick to trust a caring woman. Edward held Michael tighter, horrified by the revelation that they were just another cog in an elaborate criminal scheme. How many families, Christina? Edward, do you really want to know? Will you be able to sleep at night knowing there are other babies suffering as we speak? It was a cruel but effective question. Christina knew exactly how to manipulate his conscience. If you turn me in, they'll just find someone else to do the job, and next time they might not be as careful as I was. Careful, you almost killed my son. But I didn't, did I? Michael is alive and will make a full recovery. Other babies might not be so lucky. Edward realized Christina was trying to position herself as the lesser evil, as if he should be grateful for her restraint. Edward, there's one last thing you need to know. Christina looked him directly in the eye. Do they know where Michael goes to daycare, where you shop, where you spend your free time? If you turn me in, they'll consider it a breach of the rules of the game. What rules? The rule that rich men don't ask questions about how their problems get solved. Edward began to grasp the magnitude of what he was facing. It wasn't just about Christina. It was about a criminal organization that targeted wealthy, vulnerable families. The sound of approaching sirens broke the tension. The police had arrived. Last chance, Edward, Christina said quickly. Tell them it was a misunderstanding, that the tests were wrong, that you were paranoid from the stress of being a new father. Never? Then you've just sentenced Michael to a life of fear. They will never stop watching you. Edward stood up, resolute. I'd rather face this organization than let you go free to hurt other children. Edward, you have no idea what you're doing. I know exactly what I'm doing. I'm protecting my son and all the other children you could hurt. Christina looked at him with an expression that mixed anger with something that might have been respect. You're braver than I thought, or more foolish. We'll find out soon enough. The doorbell rang, announcing the police. Edward knew he was about to take a step that would change their lives forever, but looking down at Michael, who was beginning to stir at the noise, he knew he had no other choice. Some battles must be fought, even when the odds are stacked against you, and protecting an innocent child was worth any risk. Edward opened the door to the police officers, holding his son and a resolve that not even the threats of a criminal organization could shake. The war was just beginning, but Edward finally knew who he was fighting. The police officers entered the mansion at the exact moment Robert Shaw, the private investigator, arrived at the gate. Edward watched the man in his 50s approach with a briefcase full of documents and an expression that blended determination with concern. Dr. Evans arrived right behind the officers, bringing the lab results that would definitively confirm the poisoning. The lead detective, an experienced man named Armstrong, listened intently as Edward recounted the entire situation. Christina remained seated on the sofa, seemingly calm, but Edward could see her hands trembling slightly. Mr. Shaw, you said you have information on the suspect. Detective Armstrong addressed the private investigator. I have much more than information, Detective. I have evidence of a criminal operation that's been running for at least 5 years. Robert opened his briefcase, revealing photographs, documents, and detailed reports. The woman you know as Christina Dubois is actually named Carmen Vance. She's 35, with a degree in pharmaceutical chemistry and a history of relationships with wealthy men that ended in tragedies involving young children. Edward's blood ran cold. What kind of tragedies? Robert glanced at Michael in Edward's arms before answering. In Chicago, she was involved with a commodities trader. His 8-month-old son died, supposedly of respiratory complications. In Dallas, another entrepreneur lost a 1-year-old daughter to sudden infant death syndrome. In both cases, Carmen inherited a considerable fortune. The silence in the room was deafening. Edward looked at Christina, who kept her head down but showed no surprise at the revelations. Detective, this isn't just attempted poisoning, Robert continued. This is serial homicide. Carmen is part of a network that identifies wealthy, vulnerable men, especially single fathers or widowers with young children. How does this network operate? The detective asked. They have informants in hospitals, daycares, and private schools. When they identify a potential target, they send in trained women to get close and win the family's trust. Edward remembered how he'd met Christina at a pediatrician's appointment, where she had, coincidentally, helped when Michael was crying in the waiting room. It had been no coincidence. The initial goal isn't to kill immediately, Robert went on. They create health problems that make the woman indispensable. If the relationship evolves to marriage or a domestic partnership, they gain rights to the inheritance. Only then do they eliminate the children. And if the man discovers the truth before that? Edward asked. No, they have protocols for that too. Threats, blackmail, and in extreme cases. Robert hesitated. Accidents that eliminate both the child and the father. Christina finally raised her head, looking directly at Edward. You shouldn't have dug into this. Now it's too late to protect Michael. Carmen Vance, you are under arrest for attempted murder and participation in a criminal enterprise, Detective Armstrong declared. You have no idea what you're doing, Christina replied calmly. There are judges, prosecutors, and police officers involved in this. Very powerful people who won't be happy about this arrest. Robert leaned forward. That's why we've already looped in the FBI. This case will be handled as organized crime and money laundering. Edward saw something like fear in Christina's eyes for the first time since he discovered the truth. "Mr. Stanford," Robert said, "and we need to place you and Michael in protective custody immediately. The organization will try to eliminate you as soon as they hear about Carmen's arrest." "For how long?" "Until we can dismantle the entire network. Based on what we've found, it could take months." Edward looked at Michael, who watched everything with his big, innocent eyes. The child had no idea he had survived an assassination attempt orchestrated by a sophisticated criminal organization. "There's one more thing," Robert said. "We found evidence that Carmen was recording your intimate conversations. Edward, likely for future blackmail or to better understand your habits and vulnerabilities." Edward felt violated in a way he had never experienced. "Where are these recordings?" "They're being analyzed by the FBI. But Edward, this means they know a lot about you, your routine, your fears, your weaknesses." "Detective," Edward addressed the officer, "what happens to the other families?" Robert said there are other targets. "We have already launched investigations based on Mr. Shaw's information. There are at least 12 families at risk across the country." Christina laughed bitterly. "You think arresting one person will stop this? There are dozens of women like me, and they are much more careful. That's why we need your cooperation," the detective said. "If you help us dismantle the organization, we can negotiate a reduced sentence." "You don't get it." Christina shook her head. "It's not just about money. It's about power. There are people in this organization who control entire sectors of the economy. They won't just give up because one operation went wrong." Edward stood up, still holding Michael. "Then we'll fight them, all the families they've threatened." "Edward, you're talking about a war against people with limitless resources," Robert warned. "They chose war when they decided to poison my son. Now they're going to find out that some fathers are willing to fight to the end to protect their children." Maria and Sophia entered the room, brought in by officers to give their statements. The 8-year-old girl looked at Christina without fear, but with a determination that impressed all the adults present. "Mr. Edward," Sophia said, "I knew she was bad. My mom always says kids can feel those things." Edward knelt down to Sophia's level, still holding Michael. "Sophia, you saved Michael's life. You are the bravest girl I know. Is everything going to be okay now?" Edward looked around the room at the determined police officers, Robert with his evidence, Dr. Evans with his test results, Maria and Sophia with their simple courage, and a handcuffed Christina representing an evil that had to be fought. "Everything's going to be okay, Sophia, because good people like you won't let bad people hurt innocent children." As Christina was led away by the police, Edward knew the real battle was just beginning. But for the first time in months, he didn't feel alone. He had allies, he had evidence, and most importantly, he had a cause worth fighting for. The protection of Michael and all the other children in danger had become his life's mission. 3 weeks after Carmen's arrest, Edward was in a discreet downtown hotel under police protection when he received a call that changed everything. Robert Shaw was on the other end of the line, his voice a mixture of triumph and exhaustion. "Edward, we got her. Carmen decided to cooperate." Edward's heart raced. "What does that mean?" "It means we have names, addresses, bank accounts, and evidence on the entire operation. The FBI is conducting simultaneous raids in 7 states as we speak." Edward looked at Michael, who was playing quietly in a portable crib, completely oblivious to the revolution his salvation had triggered. The baby was visibly healthier, his eyes brighter, and his smile more frequent since the poisoning had stopped. "How many people are being arrested?" 43 so far, including 2 judges, a prosecutor, 3 police detectives, and several businessmen who were financing the operation. Edward felt a mix of relief and outrage. How did a network like this operate for so long? Money, Edward, a lot of money. They paid informants in hospitals, daycares, private schools. They had contacts in clerks' offices, banks, insurance companies. It was a well-oiled machine for identifying and exploiting vulnerable families. And the other families, the children who were in danger. That's the best news. We managed to warn 17 families in time. 5 children were being poisoned in a similar way to Michael. They are all receiving medical treatment and recovering well. Edward closed his eyes, feeling the weight of the responsibility he had shouldered. His decision to report Carmen had saved other children from suffering the same fate as Michael. "Robert, there's something I need to know. Carmen mentioned there would be retaliation if I turned her in. Are we still in danger?" The head of the organization was arrested last night. It's a titan of the pharmaceutical industry, you know, Marcus Thorne. Edward almost dropped the phone. Marcus Thorne was an acquaintance from his elite business circle. They had played golf together several times. Marcus, but he has his own children. Exactly. That's how he knew how to manipulate other fathers. He understood the vulnerabilities, the fears, the needs. Carmen told us he would suggest targets himself based on casual conversations at country clubs and social events. Edward remembered a specific conversation with Marcus months ago, where he had mentioned his struggles with Michael and his exhaustion as a single father. Marcus had been very sympathetic, even suggesting Edward needed specialized help to care for the child. He was sizing me up as a target. No doubt. And Edward, there's more. We found documents showing you were being prepped for the final phase of the plan. What final phase? Carmen had prepared a detailed report on your habits, your daily routes, your vulnerable points. They were planning an accident that would have eliminated you and Michael simultaneously, making it look like your own negligence as a father. Edward felt nauseous. And when? Based on the dates in the documents, probably within the next 2 weeks. Edward, you didn't just save Michael, you saved yourself. The hotel phone rang, interrupting the conversation. Edward answered cautiously, "Mr. Stanford, this is Dr. Evans. I have excellent news about Michael." "What is it?" "The latest tests show no signs of permanent damage to Michael's neurological development. A child's brain is remarkably resilient, and he has fully recovered from the exposure to the chemical substances." Tears of relief streamed down Edward's face. "Are you sure, doctor?" "Absolutely. Michael will grow up to be a completely normal and healthy boy. Cognitively, physically, emotionally, there will be no lasting effects." Edward looked at his son, who at that moment raised his arms to be picked up, smiling with the pure joy that had returned to his expressions. "Doctor, one more thing. Other children were exposed to the same substances. Will they recover too?" "Yes, Edward. All the children we were able to identify in time are recovering well. You didn't just save Michael, your courage saved many other children." When Edward hung up, Maria and Sophia entered the room. They were also under police protection, but the girls seemed to be handling the situation better than many adults. "Mr. Edward, can I play with Michael?" Sophia asked with the unique naturalness of children. "Of course, Sophia." Edward watched the 8-year-old girl play gently with Michael, making him laugh with funny faces. It was a scene of pure innocence and joy, a stark contrast to the dark revelations of the past weeks. "Maria, how can I ever thank you for what you've done?" Maria smiled with the simple wisdom Edward had come to value. "Mr. Stanford, there's nothing to thank us for. Sophia did what any brave child would do. She protected someone who couldn't protect himself. But you risked everything, your jobs, your safety. Sir, some things are more important than jobs. A child's safety is one of them." Edward knelt beside Sophia. "Sophia, you know you're a hero, don't you?" The girl stopped playing and looked at him seriously. "Mr. Edward, I just did what was right. Mom always says that when you see someone hurting a kid, you have to tell a grown-up who can help. What if I hadn't believed you?" Sophia thought for a moment. "Then I would have told another grown-up, and another, until someone believed me and helped Michael." The girl's determination was inspiring. Edward realized he had learned more about courage from an 8-year-old than in his entire adult life. Robert Shaw arrived at the hotel later that afternoon with more news. Edward, Carmen's cooperation was so complete that we've managed to dismantle not only the US network, but also similar operations in Argentina and Chile. International operations. Yes, it was bigger than we ever imagined, but it's over now. All the leaders are in custody, their financial assets are frozen, and the victims are being protected. Edward sat on the sofa, finally feeling the weight of the last few months lift. When can we go home? Tomorrow. If you'd like. The threat has been completely neutralized. Edward looked around the small hotel room that had been their refuge for weeks. Soon, he would be back at his estate, but he knew he would never be the same man who had left it. The experience had fundamentally changed his perspective on trust, family, and what truly mattered in life. Michael started to fuss, signaling he was hungry. Edward prepared the bottle, a task he now insisted on doing himself, and watched his son drink peacefully. "Michael," Edward whispered, "you'll never know how much you taught us about courage and love, and about the importance of listening to the right people." As Michael finished his bottle, Edward knew that the true victory wasn't just in the criminals' arrests, but in the recovery of the innocence and trust he had lost. His family had survived the cruelest imaginable attack and emerged stronger than ever. Edward pulled the car up to the estate for the first time in almost a month. The wrought iron gate, the immaculate gardens, the imposing facade. It all looked exactly the same, but he knew nothing would ever be the same again. Carrying Michael in his arms, he surveyed the property that had been the stage for so much suffering and near tragedy. "Can I help you with the bags, Mr. Stanford?" Maria approached with Sophia by her side, both of them beaming to finally be home. "Thank you, Maria. But before we go in..." Edward hesitated, searching for the right words. "I need to say something to you both." Sophia looked at him with her big, curious eyes, while Maria waited respectfully. "You saved our family, not just from Carmen, but from an entire criminal network that was hurting other families. Sophia's courage and your wisdom changed our lives forever." "Mr. Edward," Sophia interrupted with typical childhood directness, "is the house going to be different now?" Edward smiled, surprised by the girl's perceptiveness. "Why do you ask?" "Because you're different, in a good way. You look at Michael more now, and you smile more too." The child's simple words hit Edward deeply. She was right. He had changed. The work-obsessed man who delegated his son's care had transformed into someone who truly understood the meaning of fatherhood. "Sophia's right," Maria confirmed softly. "You've discovered what it means to be a real father." Edward hugged Michael tighter, feeling the weight of that truth. For months, he had outsourced fatherhood to Carmen, thinking he was a good parent by hiring the best caregiver. Now he understood that being a father meant being present, observing, questioning, and protecting personally. "Let's go inside," Edward said. "We have a new life to begin." The mansion smelled of polish and fresh flowers. Maria had the cleaning staff prepare everything for their return, but Edward noticed subtle changes. There were no traces of Carmen left, not a photo, not a personal item. It was as if she had never existed. In his study, Edward faced piles of mail, business reports, and documents that had accumulated in his absence. For a moment, he felt the old anxiety of the always busy executive return. But then, Michael babbled something incomprehensible and smiled at him. And Edward realized his priorities had radically shifted. "Sophia, want to show Michael how to feed the fish in the pond?" Edward suggested. The girl nodded enthusiastically and ran out to the garden. Edward followed her, carrying Michael, and for the first time in years, he completely ignored the work-related emails and calls piling up. In the garden, he watched Sophia kneel by the edge of the small ornamental pond, patiently explaining to Michael about the goldfish swimming peacefully. The baby watched, fascinated, reaching his little hands toward the water. "See, Michael, this one is Goldie, and that's Princess," Sophia narrated seriously. "And they've lived here a long time, and they protect the garden from bad things." Edward sat on the grass beside them, something he would never have done before. His expensive suit might get dirty, but it no longer mattered. What mattered was this moment of pure joy and innocence. "Mr. Edward," Sophia turned to him, "can I ask a question?" "Of course. Are you still going to work so much now?" The question was direct and honest, typical of Sophia. Edward thought for a moment before answering. "I'm going to work enough to take good care of you, your mom and Michael, but I'm never again going to work so much that I miss watching you all grow up." Sophia smiled, satisfied with the answer. "Good, because Michael needs you to teach him boy stuff, and I need you to teach me about business." "About business?" "Yeah. Mom says you're really smart about business. I want to learn so when I grow up I can help people, like you helped those other families." A deep emotion welled up in Edward's chest. Sophia, at 8, already showed an understanding of justice and protecting the vulnerable that many adults never develop. "Sophia, it would be an honor to teach you about business, but first, can you teach me about courage?" The girl giggled. "You already know about courage, Mr. Edward. You showed it when you faced that mean lady to protect Michael. But you taught me first. If it weren't for your courage, I never would have found out the truth." Maria approached, carrying a tray of sandwiches and juice. "I thought you might like a picnic in the garden." "Perfect," Edward replied, realizing he was genuinely hungry. During their time at the hotel, he had eaten only out of necessity. Now, for the first time in weeks, he felt like savoring a meal. As they ate in the garden, Edward watched the natural dynamic between Sophia and Michael. The girl treated the baby with a protective tenderness that moved him. Michael, in turn, seemed more relaxed and happy than Edward could remember seeing him since birth. "Maria," Edward said suddenly, "I want to make you a proposition." "Yes, sir." "I want you and Sophia to move into the mansion permanently, not as employees, but as family." Maria was speechless for a moment. "Mr. Stanford, that is very generous." "But no buts, Maria. You saved our family. Sophia is like a big sister to Michael, and you," Edward hesitated, his voice thick with emotion, "you are the mother figure he needs. Not a hired caregiver, but someone who truly cares for him." "And can I still take care of the garden?" Sophia asked practically. "Of course. And you'll have your own room, and you can decorate it however you want." Sophia jumped for joy, running to tell the fish the news. Maria had tears in her eyes. "Mr. Stanford, I don't know how to thank you." "You don't have to thank me for anything, Maria. We're the ones who should be thanking you." The sun began to set, painting the sky with golden hues that reflected on the pond. Edward held Michael in his lap, watching Sophia play with the koi, while Maria organized the remains of their picnic. It was a scene of perfect family harmony, but Edward knew it had been earned through great suffering and struggle. Michael had survived an assassination attempt orchestrated by a sophisticated criminal organization. Sophia had risked her safety to protect a baby who wasn't even family. Maria had put her career on the line to support her daughter and protect an innocent child. "Michael," Edward whispered to his son, "you have a very special family. Not just daddy, but also a brave sister and a wise second mother. We will never let anyone hurt our family again." Michael smiled and babbled something that sounded almost like "daddy." Edward's heart filled with a pure joy he hadn't experienced in months. As they walked back to the mansion, Edward knew they had found something far more valuable than just security. They had found the true meaning of family, defined not by blood or contracts, but by love, mutual protection, and the courage to do what's right. 6 months after their return home, Edward prepared for a moment he had awaited with a mix of anxiety and determination. The trial of Carmen Vance had finally arrived, and he was the prosecution's star witness. Dressed in his best suit, he looked in the bedroom mirror, seeing a transformed man looking back, Michael, now 1 year and 2 months old, played happily in his crib, his motor and cognitive skills developing perfectly. Dr. Evans had confirmed once more that there were no lasting effects from the poisoning. The boy was a healthy, happy child with a smile that could light up any room. "Daddy's going out for a little while, Michael," Edward said softly, lifting his son into his arms. "But Aunt Sophia and Grandma Maria will take care of you." Yes, Maria had become Grandma Maria to Michael, and the child had started calling her that naturally. Edward not only allowed it, but encouraged it. The wise, caring woman had filled a void in Michael's life that he hadn't even known was there. "Mr. Edward, are you nervous?" Sophia appeared at the door, now 9, and showing an impressive maturity for her age. "A little, Sophia, but it's important that I tell the judge exactly what happened, so she can't hurt any more children." "Exactly," Sophia nodded seriously. "Then you have to be very brave today, like I was that day." Edward knelt to the girl's level, still holding Michael. "Sophia, you taught me what true courage is. Today, I'm going to use what I learned from you." At the courthouse, Edward met Robert Shaw and Dr. Evans, who would also be testifying. The room was packed with journalists. The case had gained national attention as a landmark in the fight against organized crime preying on vulnerable families. "Edward, are you ready?" Robert asked. "More than ever. I got a call yesterday that gave me extra strength." "What call?" "From a father in San Antonio. His 6-month-old daughter was being poisoned with the same substance. Thanks to the media coverage of our case, he recognized the symptoms and reported the caregiver before it was too late." Robert smiled. "Another life saved by your courage to speak out." When Edward entered the courtroom, his eyes immediately met Carmen's. She was thin, her hair cut short, her expression a mix of resignation and something that could have been remorse. She was no longer the seductive, manipulative woman who had invaded his home. "The state calls Edward Stanford to the stand," the prosecutor announced. Edward walked to the witness box with steady steps. For the next hour, he recounted every detail. Sophia's discovery, his growing suspicions, the medical confirmation of the poisoning, and the terrible revelation that Carmen was part of a criminal organization targeting children. "Mr. Stanford," the defense attorney asked during cross-examination, "don't you think it's possible you misinterpreted my client's actions? After all, she cared for your son devotedly for months." Edward looked directly at Carmen before answering. "Counselor, devoted care means protecting a child from harm, not creating the harm. Carmen systematically poisoned my son for months, causing unnecessary suffering to an innocent baby. That is not care, it is calculated cruelty. But she has confessed that she believed she was helping. She confessed she was following orders from a criminal organization that was targeting my fortune." Edward interrupted firmly. "And more importantly, she admitted she did this to other families before mine. How many children suffered before Michael? How many died?" The defense attorney had no answer. Dr. Evans presented irrefutable medical evidence of the poisoning. Robert Shaw detailed the extent of the criminal organization and how Carmen was a key player. Other parents, victims of similar schemes, gave testimony via video conference from different states. When it was Carmen's turn to speak, she rose slowly and looked directly at Edward. "I know nothing I say can undo what I've done," she began, her voice trembling. "Edward, I really did grow to care for Michael and for you in a way." Edward felt anger rise in his chest but forced himself to remain calm. "But I was trapped in something bigger than me," Carmen continued. "The organization, they had ways of controlling us. I tried to get out once, after the second case, but they threatened my own family." "You have a family?" the judge asked. "A younger sister? They said they'd do to her what they did to the other children if I didn't cooperate." Edward felt a pang of something unexpected, compassion. It didn't excuse Carmen, but he began to understand that she was also, in a way, a victim of the organization. Carmen, the judge addressed her, do you understand the gravity of your crimes? Yes, Your Honor. I poisoned innocent children. I caused suffering to entire families. I participated in murders. Tears streamed down her face. I deserve whatever punishment you see fit. And what do you have to say to the families you victimized? Carmen looked around the room, her eyes stopping on each parent present. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I want you to know I will spend the rest of my life trying to atone for the evil I've caused. I've already provided every name, every piece of information I had on other operations, and specifically to Mr. Edward Stanford. Carmen looked directly at Edward. Edward, Michael is a beautiful, special boy. You're a wonderful father now, much better than you were when we met. I hope Michael grows up knowing how hard you fought to protect him. Edward felt conflicting emotions. Part of him still felt anger and disgust. But another part, the one that had learned about forgiveness from Maria and Sophia, recognized a broken human being trying to find redemption. Your Honor. Edward stood up. May I say something? The judge nodded. Carmen, what you did was unforgivable. You almost killed my son and destroyed our family, but Edward took a deep breath. Your cooperation saved other children. That doesn't erase your crimes, but it means some good came from this tragedy. Carmen nodded, crying silently. The judge delivered the sentence, 15 years in prison for Carmen, with the possibility of parole based on her continued cooperation with the authorities. Leaving the courthouse, Edward felt a weight lift from his shoulders. Justice had been served, other families were protected, and he could finally close this terrible chapter of their lives. Robert Shaw caught up with him on the courthouse steps. Edward, I want you to know your courage saved at least 20 children across the country. Other families can sleep safely because of you. Thanks to Sophia, Edward corrected. She was the one who was brave enough to speak up when no adult was paying attention. Driving home, Edward thought of Michael playing with Sophia in the garden, protected by the love of a family forged through adversity. They had defeated evil with courage, truth, and, in the end, even a measure of forgiveness. The battle was over, and love had triumphed over cruelty. A year and a half after that terrible day when Sophia ran for help, Edward stood in the same garden where it all began, but now he was watching a completely different scene. Michael, at 2 years old, ran joyfully among the flowers, chasing a giggling Sophia, their laughter echoing across the estate like pure music. "Don't step on the roses, Michael," Sophia shouted between laughs, expertly guiding the toddler along the garden paths she knew by heart. Edward smiled, observing the perfect dynamic between them. Sophia had become much more than a sister to Michael. She was his protector, teacher, and best friend. The boy followed her everywhere, soaking up every word from the girl who had become his personal hero. Mr. Stanford, Maria approached with a tray of iced lemonade. The meeting with the Foundation's board is at 3. Remember? Of course, Maria. Thank you for arranging everything. The Michael and Sophia Foundation for Child Protection had become the most important project of Edward's life. Using a portion of his fortune, he had created an organization dedicated to identifying and protecting at-risk children, especially those threatened by criminal schemes targeting vulnerable families. "Daddy, look!" Michael came running on his still wobbly legs, holding a flower he had picked. For you." Edward accepted the crumpled yellow flower with more emotion than he would feel, landing the biggest business deal of his life. "Thank you, champ. It's beautiful." "Sophia teached me," Michael announced proudly, pointing to the approaching girl. "Sophia teaches you a lot of good things, doesn't she?" Michael nodded vigorously and then ran back to play. Edward watched his son with a mixture of pride and gratitude that still surprised him with its intensity. Michael had grown into a vibrant, curious, and affectionate child, with no sign of the trauma he could have carried. "Mr. Edward," Sophia approached, now 10, and displaying an intelligence and maturity that impressed everyone who met her. "Can I ask a question?" "Always, Sophia." "Do you ever think about Christina or Carmen, her real name?" Edward was taken aback by the question. Sophia always demonstrated an emotional perception beyond her years. But this query made him reflect deeply. "Sometimes, yes. Why? Because I think maybe she wasn't all bad. Maybe she was just lost and didn't know how to ask for help." The girl's wisdom continued to astound him. "What makes you think that?" "Because all bad people don't cry for real when they get caught, and she cried for real in court. I saw it on TV." Edward sat on the grass, motioning for Sophia to do the same. "You're right, Sophia. I think Carmen was trapped in something she couldn't control on her own. Like we were trapped, not knowing what was happening to Michael. In a way, yes, but that doesn't excuse what she did. I know, hurting kids is never excusable," Sophia said with a firmness that belied her age. "But maybe we can help people like her before they do bad things." Edward smiled, once again impressed by Sophia's ability to find hope and the potential for good even in the darkest situations. "Actually, Sophia, that's exactly what our foundation is going to do, not just protect children, but also help adults who are in desperate situations before they hurt someone." Sophia's eyes lit up with interest. "Can I help when I grow up?" "Sophia, you're already helping. Every child our foundation saves will be saved because you had the courage to speak the truth that day." Maria joined them on the grass, something that would have been unthinkable in the old employer-employee dynamic, but was now natural in their unconventional family. "The children are arriving for the foundation's launch party," Maria announced. Edward had organized a garden party to celebrate the official launch of the foundation, and he had invited all the families who had been saved thanks to the dismantling of the criminal network. It was a gathering of survivors, but mostly a celebration of life and child protection. Soon the garden was filled with the cheerful voices of children playing, parents chatting, and laughter echoing through the trees. Edward watched the scene with a deep satisfaction that transcended any business success he had ever experienced. "Mr. Stanford," a man approached, carrying a girl of about 3. "I'm Carlos from San Antonio. This is my daughter, Anna." Edward remembered immediately. "Of course. You called after seeing our case on the news." "Exactly. Anna was being poisoned by her nanny. Thanks to your example, I reported it in time." The man had tears in his eyes. "How can I thank you for saving my daughter?" "You don't have to thank me. Thank Sophia over there." Edward pointed to the girl who was organizing a game with all the children present. She was the one brave enough to save Michael first. Carlos went over to Sophia and knelt down to her level. "Sophia, thank you so much for saving my daughter." Sophia was slightly embarrassed by the attention, but replied with her characteristic honesty, "I just did what was right. Anyone would do the same." "Not everyone has your courage," Carlos replied. As the party continued, Edward stepped back to take in the whole scene. Michael played happily with other children who had also survived poisoning attempts. Sophia naturally led the group, protecting the younger ones and including everyone in the games. Maria circulated among the parents, offering food and comfort with her warm presence. Dr. Evans approached Edward. "You know, Edward, in 40 years of pediatrics, I've never seen a transformation like yours." "How so?" "You went from an outsourced father to someone who dedicates his life to child protection. It's inspiring. I just learned what really matters in life." "And what's that?" Edward looked at Michael, who at that moment stumbled and was immediately caught by Sophia, who helped him up and kissed his imaginary scrape. "That true love is protection, and that sometimes it's the smallest voices that carry the most important warnings." As the sun began to set, the guests left, but the garden remained full of life with Michael, Sophia, and Maria. Edward watched them prepare a new flower bed, a tradition they had developed to commemorate every important milestone. "This bed is to celebrate our foundation," Sophia explained to Michael, who was helping by patting dirt into a pot with his small hands. Michael help," the boy announced proudly. "Yes, Michael will always help protect other children," Sophia replied fondly. Edward joined them, kneeling in the dirt without a thought for his expensive suit. Together, they planted white roses, symbolizing new beginnings and hope. "Daddy," Michael looked up at Edward with his big, trusting eyes. "You happy?" Edward scooped his son into his arms, hugging him tight. "Very happy, Michael. Happier than I ever imagined possible." As they walked back to the mansion at dusk, Edward reflected on the extraordinary journey they had traveled. From a house full of lies and danger, they had built a home based on truth, mutual protection, and unconditional love. The mansion that once represented status and isolation was now a symbol of family, community, and purpose. The garden where Michael was nearly poisoned had become a place of healing and joy, and the man who once trusted strangers blindly had learned to listen to the voices that truly mattered. Michael slept peacefully that night, protected by the love of a family that knew the value of watchful care. Sophia fell asleep with her books on child advocacy spread across her bed, already dreaming of all the children she would help protect in the future. Maria rested with the satisfaction of someone who had seen her courage and wisdom transform lives. And Edward, for the first time in years, slept soundly, knowing he had found his true purpose in life, to protect the innocent and ensure that the brave voice of an 8-year-old girl would continue to echo, saving other children. The estate was finally at peace, transformed from a stage for manipulation into a home of true love, where protection came not from wealth or status, but from the courage to do what is right, even when the danger comes from those we trust the most.